Thank you all for joining the Carlos Museum this evening for the lecture At the Edge of America, the Stunning Art and Life of T.C. Cannon. This lecture is offered in celebration of the recent installation of the painting Grandmother, Gestating Father and the Washita River Runs Ribbon-Like in the Carlos Museum Native North American Galleries. If you haven't been to see it yet, I highly recommend it. It looks absolutely beautiful. And I will say, just from my own personal experience, photos can't do it justice. It's beautiful work to see in person. We welcome tonight Karen Kramer, the Stuart W and Elizabeth F. Pratt Curator of Native American and Oceanic Art and Culture at the Peabody Essex Museum. Kramer's longstanding commitment to innovative approaches to Indigenous art and culture and her broad experiences working with Native artists, scholars, communities, and other stakeholders have helped shape the program in Native American and Oceanic art and culture. Over the past 20 years, Kramer's helped produce more than 10 major exhibitions at the Peabody Essex Museum, including the nationally traveling, groundbreaking exhibition, T.C. Cannon at the Edge of America. She also curated Native Fashion Now, an exhibition that celebrated contemporary Native American fashion from the 1950s to today, and Shape-Shifting, Transformations in Native American Art, which dismantled stereotypes and explored concepts of change, worldview, and politics in historical and contemporary Native art. Kramer also co-directs PEM's Native American Fellowship Program, providing training for rising Native American leaders in the museum, cultural, and academic sectors. Kramer served as president, vice president, and as board member for the Native American Art Studies Association from 2003 to 2015. And she's worked on 3 inaugural exhibitions at the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian and for National NAGPRA, which is a lot. You've been very busy.
That's old.
Kramer earned her MA in anthropology from George Washington University and her BA in anthropology from the University of Denver. She's a PhD candidate in American Studies at Harvard University, pursuing a dissertation that will focus on Indigenous public arts, arts-based critiques of settler colonialism, and cultural memory in the American public sector. Tonight, Kramer will explore Cannon's visual language and the key ideas he engaged over his 20-year career, including dispossession, war, gender, and power, and survivance. Cannon's work also reveals the histories and politics of Native U.S. relations in the 19th and 20th centuries, as well as connections to American art and music in the 1960s and 70s, and Western art writ large. This lecture is made possible through the generous support of Lynn Kirkland and the Grace Welch Blanton Lecture Fund. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Karen.
Thank you so much. Before I get started, I'm going to do my screen share and we'll just get rolling that way. All right. Good evening, everyone. As Katie said, my name is Karen Kramer, and I'm the Curator of Native American and Oceanic Art and Culture at the Peabody Essex Museum, where I also serve as the Director of our Native American Fellowship Program. I curated a national touring exhibition called T.C. Cannon at the Edge of America, which debuted at the Peabody Essex Museum in 2018, and it traveled to the Gilcrease Museum in Tulsa and the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian in New York between 2018 and 2019. So I am so happy that T.C. Cannon once again brings people together to celebrate his art and life through the Michael C. Carlos Museum and Cannon's painting, Grandmother, Gestating Father, and the Washita River Runs Ribbon-Like, which recently went on view, as Katie said, in the Ancient Americas Galleries, which was made possible through a partnership with Art Bridges Foundation. Tonight, I'm speaking to you from my home, which is on ancestral Pawtucket lands. And I just want to thank Katie so much, who is the Ingram Director of Education at the Carlos Museum at Emory, for this invitation to speak tonight. And thank you also to all of the Carlos people who made this program possible, and for all of you for coming and tuning in and supporting. So by way of a brief background about myself and my work at the Peabody Essex Museum, I am a settler, scholar, curator who works at the intersection of historic and contemporary Native art And I really try hard to invite and incite change in how we understand Native art and culture, and also to expand the canon of American art to include Native art. And our own collection at the Peabody Essex Museum is the oldest in the Western Hemisphere, and it contains some of the finest works created over the past 10,000 years. And so we have, over the past 2 decades or so, been working to travel and mount some exhibitions that really show a dynamic and creative range of Native creative expression. And TC Canon really falls into the last big traveling exhibition that I had the honor of curating, and it kind of demonstrates the Peabody Essex Museum's commitment to Native American art and culture, and to really helping the public reach new understandings and deeper and greater nuanced understandings of what it means to be Native in America today. So it is a real honor to have gotten to know TC Canon through this exhibition that I curated, and to revisit him for this presentation tonight. Canon's biography and creative output are equally compelling, and I'm excited to explore some of this together this evening. So tonight we will be meeting the artist. Canon was a global citizen who drew from new expressions of a Native modernism. His deep engagement with Western art history, philosophy, world religion, and his unique worldview as a Kiowa and Caddo man that included a nearly 1-year-long tour of duty in Vietnam in the Army's elite 101st Airborne Division between 1968 and 1979. We will be discovering his artwork by combining Native subjects and storytelling traditions with Western painting techniques. Canon inserted his Native American voice as a stand-in for countless generations of underrepresented, oppressed Native peoples, and explored the contemporary Native experience in which the historical past is ever present. Canon, more than any other contemporary Native artist at the time, saturated his images with the same force, power, and inventiveness that drove the history of representation from a European perspective, but he puts the Native experience front and center. And his unique Native perspective was one that had been largely unaccounted for in the annals of American history and the canon of Western painting. So we will also know his impact through the tropes of traditional painting, such as portraiture, landscape, and other narrative modes, and through poetry, prose, and music. Canon built a conversation around social justice, history, and representation, demonstrating that Native American art is always a part of American art. And I will share some insights about the exhibition, as well as explore his visual language and the key ideas that he engaged over his 20-year career and his enduring legacy. So I want to start by sharing a passage from a letter that TC Canon wrote from Ban Hoa, Vietnam. As a soldier, again, in the United States Army's 101st Airborne Division, he was 3 months into the Tet Offensive, dated April 15th, 1968, which is really close to today's date, actually. This almost immediately followed Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. And this letter reads, at least the passage of the letter reads, "This place really does one thing for you. It makes you strong in will. You say to yourself, I'm going to walk out of this place alive. Some people don't. I don't have that big a dream of America to be a total right-wingist and go around condemning M.L. King's assassin and at the same time refuse his wife a seat in my convent. I'm so goddamn sick of this whole scene about this war and the supposed peace talks and dead Negroes and looting Negroes and peer-registered peons from Mississippi who think they're going to go to a segregated heaven. I've just got no room in my heart anymore for what I'm supposed to have in my heart for the tolerance of mankind. Of course, I still have a love for man, but only if I can recognize love in them. Otherwise, I'd rather be a blade of grass on a terrace of Machu Picchu in South America." So this places Cannon squarely in the turbulent social and political climate that defined 1960s and 70s America, the same time frame that Cannon worked as an artist until his untimely death in 1978 at 31 years old. This passage expresses the political urgency that encapsulated Cannon's creative output. And like his painting, poetry, prose, and music, this passage is deeply personal, yet undeniably political. And it so adeptly underscores contradiction, something Cannon explored throughout his short but highly productive and impactful career. Some say that history doesn't repeat itself, that it rhymes. With ongoing national and global conversations about ethnic identity, social justice, land rights, and cultural appropriation, Cannon's letter, and indeed his whole body of work, continues to engage issues that are as relevant now as they were 50 years ago. So following on this thread, here is another quote by Cannon dated to the mid-1970s. So we can kind of read this together. An Indian painting is any painting that's done by an Indian. Today, however, I really don't think there is such a thing as an Indian painting. There are so many modes that people are working in that it seems beside the point to call a painting Indian just because the artist is an Indian. People don't call a work by Picasso a Spanish painting. They call it a Picasso. After all, Picasso spent most of his life in France anyway. Does that make him a Spanish painter or a French painter? I say it makes him Picasso. And I love this quote. It expresses Cannon's desire not to be pigeonholed into any one category of artist, and it reflects his aversion to binaries. He didn't draw simple lines between native and non-native people and art. He was really engaged in and interested in the space in between. And like many Native artists, he wanted to be understood as an artist first and foremost, and he didn't necessarily want his cultural identities to define him or limit understanding of his work. He wanted it to stand on its own on a broader platform. He felt strongly that contemporary Native art deserved to be critiqued, evaluated, and appreciated alongside mainstream art and artists. So the title for tonight's talk, At the Edge of America, follows the title for the exhibition I already mentioned, and it really signals the continued marginalization and oppression voiced in Cannon's work that has contemporary corollaries in politics, polemics, and activism. America today, as in the 1960s and 70s, is on the edge of political upheaval. Marginalized voices are demanding to be heard, not just in political arenas, but in the art world as well. All aspects of Cannon's work really aim to raise this kind of consciousness and bring Cannon into a more expansive conversation of American politics and art and culture. Cannon used his artistic practice as a political tool, bringing to life brutal traumas wrought by colonization and historical amnesia. He explored power dynamics between the oppressors and the oppressed, and he underscored all this by emphasizing the incredible resilience and persistence of Native people. T.C. Cannon was raised in Gracemont, a small town in south central Oklahoma, and his was the only Native family in the rural farming community of roughly 300 people. He grew up poor and a minority in a predominantly white world. Cannon's mother was Caddo and his father Kiowa, and not 2 centuries before, his ancestors were the power brokers of the plains. And in fact, Cannon was a descendant of the Southern Plains warriors on horseback, the warriors that Hollywood movie Indians attempted to emulate. He went to an all-Native day school in Anadarko, Oklahoma, where he started to understand his passion for art making. He grew up when life in the United States was shifting its tenor in quickening responses to the post-war economic boom. The new television culture, the jet age, the shadow of the nuclear bomb, and numerous activism campaigns inspired by political injustices and social inequality. Cannon was just 18 years old when he left home in rural Oklahoma for the newly formed experimental art school, the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Starting in the late 1920s and early 1930s, non-Native art instructors taught painting to Native students, informed as they were by a general sense that Native culture was at risk of being forever lost to assimilation and modernization. Oscar B. Jacobson led these efforts at the University of Oklahoma, and Dorothy Dunn did so at the Santa Fe Indian School in New Mexico. Their students embraced the flat representational style of painting as it became the dominant mode of creative expression on the art market. Jacobson promoted the work of 6 Kiowa artists, who later became known as the Kiowa Six. And the artists took elements of traditional plains pictography, profiles of humans and animals in a 2-dimensional format without any background or indication of setting, and a sureness of line, which you can see in this late 19th century ledger drawing in the upper left-hand corner, done by a Kiowa artist. And they fused these elements with a figurative flat style now known as Southern Plains painting. Their subject matter was predominantly intertribal dancers, ceremonies, musicians, and Kiowa daily life, which you can see on the right and at the bottom. The careers of the Kiowa Six inspired Cannon and his early work, and coincidentally, several in the group of the Kiowa Six had also attended Cannon's high school alma mater, St. Patrick's Mission in Anadarko, Oklahoma. So while the Kiowa Six were not the first Native Americans to be successful in the international mainstream art world, their careers proved inspirational in the 20th century. Cannon would have been very familiar with the Kiowa Six. Being Kiowa himself and growing up near Anadarko, Oklahoma, Cannon sold his work at the Indian Arts and Crafts Cooperative inside the Southern Plains Indian Museum, and he won awards at the annual American Indian Exposition in Anadarko. And many Kiowa Six artists painted many of these murals commissioned by the WPA in 1936, which are still hanging in the Anadarko post office, which you're looking at here on the screen, where Cannon would have seen it, would have seen this work. This early drawing by T.C. Cannon on the left from his adolescence shows him mimicking the Kiowa Six style. And I'm showing it with one section of the post office murals done by Stephen Mopope, and also an early Cannon drawing that he executed in his early days at the Institute of American Indian Arts. So his progressive art school instructors at the IAIA encouraged him and his peers to break away from the flat drawings of ritual and daily life and away from these ceramics that you can see in the upper left that pervaded the Native art market at the time, and to marry their Native backgrounds and sensibilities with the politics, art, and music of the day. So they reveled in pop art, op art, abstract expressionism, post-impressionism, and also Bob Dylan's music. They listened to Bob Dylan's music constantly in their art studio, and they really felt a connection to his call to action through his lyrics and his music. Cannon began to combine contemporary stylistic modes with traditional Western painting tropes and his Native worldview. Ultimately, Cannon and his student peers created an entirely new genre of Native American art, and these budding young artists pivoted dramatically from their predecessors by creating new expressions of a Native modernism and challenging the way people thought about Indianness. This legacy still burns brightly today. When Cannon produced this work here in 1966, artists in Europe and America were returning to representational figuration after a period dominated by abstraction. Civil rights activism propelled the idea of multiculturalism forward. Art, politics, and culture merged as artists began to believe in a more socially and politically responsive form of art. Along with Native artists, African-American, Hispanic, women, feminist, and gay artists made clear what issues they were tackling and voicing through their art, often through figurative expression. These artists pushed at the elitism of formalism, the strict adherence to prescribed forms in music, poetry, or art, as well as the idea of art made for art's sake. Multiculturalism also carried the politics of representation and institutional critique, and during his time at IAIA, Cannon engaged with these ideas, which are also keystones in the field of 20th century American art. Cannon began to use the figure as his entree to bigger ideas that centered Native people in a dialogue with American history. Up to that time, most paintings of Native people usually appeared as illustrative footnotes in a colonial narrative, often hypersexualized and very rarely from an Indigenous perspective. Cannon was still a student when he painted this here, Mama and Papa Have the Going Home Shiprock Blues. He was 20 years old with just 2 years of training under his belt, and this is among his most important student work. Now understood as the painting that spurred the revolutionary New Indian art movement of the 1960s, this painting captures Cannon's place at the crossroads of Native American and American cultures at a time when the definitions of both were up for debate. The mixture of abstraction and representational images in Mama and Papa Have the Going Home Shiprock Blues reflects Cannon's education and his evolving attitude toward painting, ideas, and form. A Navajo man and woman sit together, hybrids of the past and present, wearing their time-honored textiles and jewelry, and their of-the-moment sunglasses and cigarettes. Cannon suspends the central figures in time. We're not sure if they are coming or going, but Cannon creates a sense of urgency through repetition and the illusion of their watchful eyes, despite their featureless faces. Ghost-like doubles hover below them, and the female form repeats in the left rear. Separated and framed by thin lines, these sketched out figures are palimpsests, pale replications of the protagonists engulfed in their textured, timeless desert. Stenciled on the horizon line is Diné, which translates to the people in the Diné language. Stenciling was in vogue at this time, and Cannon takes his cue from artists like Larry Rivers and Jasper Johns, who used stenciling and other lettering devices in their work. Cannon's multiple repetitions of the same people are his meditation, his meditation. Cannon affixes the central Native subjects to the land, and by doing so, he claims the physical and conceptual space as Indigenous. The figures in this work are representative of Native survivance, a term coined in the 1990s by the Anishinaabe scholar Gerald Visner, which combines the word survival with the word endurance. The term recognizes Indigenous identity as malleable. Traditions can adapt to contemporary media, and new traditions can form without compromising their traditional values. Survivance is a purposeful way of living out an Indigenous worldview as an ongoing series of acts of self-determination. The work is Cannon's early manifesto in oil and acrylic on canvas, a painterly experiment in color, composition, and message. This is his reckoning of America as Indigenous country. So by combining the figure with moments in American and Native American history, Cannon inserted his Native voice and explored the contemporary experience in which the historical past is ever present. He painted this work called Soldiers in 1970, less than 1 year after his return from his tour of duty in Vietnam. And like many American soldiers following their service in Vietnam, Cannon came home really broken. He was feeling very, very conflicted. He grappled with the agonies of war. He had guilt over participating in violence that mirrored America's colonial past. And at the same time, he was proud to have served as a soldier and bonded over this with his father. They both came from a culture on the Southern Plains where being a warrior brings honor to your family and community. Never shying away from the complexity and nuance of identity politics and history, through this painting, Soldiers, Cannon highlights contradiction and incongruity. The Indian Wars of the 19th century were a touchstone for T.C. Cannon, a historical trauma that he returned to. And in Soldiers, Cannon faces the conflict between Native American and American quite literally, two sides of the same body floating on a field of white. That dual figure also captures the moral compromises of war, as many Native people served as scouts for the United States military, fighting against traditional Native enemies, when in the end, Native people on the plains were forcibly relocated to reservations toward the end of the 19th century. After Cannon's honorable discharge from the Army in 1970, he resumed making art and pursued more formal training. He came back from Vietnam more introspective, serious, and dark at times. Today, Cannon's tenuous readjustment would be understood as post-traumatic stress disorder. While he re-enrolled at a university in Oklahoma, he took classes in color perception, physiology, perspective, printing, nonfiction prose, poetry, and contemporary literature. In 1972, this painting Soldiers was a part of Cannon's career breakthrough. The museum that is now known as the Smithsonian American Art Museum invited him and his former instructor from the Institute of American Indian Arts, Fritz Scholder, to be in a two-person exhibition, two American painters, Fritz Scholder and T.C. Cannon. This exhibition was a landmark success. Cannon signed with Madison Avenue's Aberbach Gallery, who represented him nationally and internationally for the remainder of his life. Two American painters toured major cities in Europe, forging his confidence and propelling Cannon forward in his visual language. Cannon also rejected the colorless, stagnant images of Native people, such as this image taken by Edward S. Curtis. That these kinds of images were perpetuated and these kinds of stereotypes were perpetuated through historical photography. And while I imagine that Cannon may have appreciated these kinds of photographs for their formal qualities, their lasting impact on the general population includes wholesale stereotyping that compresses hundreds of distinct tribal nations into one monolithic Native culture. And Cannon used these widely circulated, oversimplified images of Native people and turned them on their heads. Cannon's sitter in Two Guns Arikara, which is here on the right, may be an amalgamation of an Edward S. Curtis portrait or a riff on delegation pictures taken of important Native diplomats negotiating treaty rights in the 19th century, as in this 1858 photograph on the left. Cannon disrupts any notion of nostalgic imagery by breathing color and life into their likenesses. He confidently updated the images by saturating them in pop colors and activated them by painting them quite literally larger than life. Cannon's Indian is every bit as seductive as the historic portraiture, but his rendering exceeds colonial limitations and constructions. Along with his Native heritage, Cannon was inspired by the unexpected, vivid colors, the energetic brushwork, and the large, flat areas that post-impressionist and Fauvist artists such as Vincent van Gogh and Henri Matisse. Cannon created his unique signature style, drawing from these techniques, referencing these visual languages he understood and loved, but he made them his own. Cannon's masterful Two Guns Arikara epitomizes his dynamic use of color and patterns and interplay between foreground and background and mashups of Native and non-Native elements. Cannon's seated warrior wears a United States military scout uniform and classic 19th century Plains Indian adornments. The searing color of his clothes, accessories, and his purple pop art pompadour pull him out of the staid world of black and white romanticized Indian portraiture that was so widely circulated in the mainstream, while the frenetic energy of the room's wallpaper and his two guns ready at the quick reinforce his defiant posture and expression. The wallpaper circles within circles were a favored leitmotif that Cannon used time and time again, and for Cannon, they symbolize renewal and healing. So poised yet watchful, Cannon's warrior confronts us to reconcile the past with the present. Cannon's pure love of painting and his raw talent sings in this 1975 Cloud Madonna painting. As with many of Cannon's paintings from the 1970s, the entire canvas has a saturated violet underpainting. The energy and fervor of Cannon's youthful passion, moralism, and love for his people is palpable here. His expert brushwork, unexpected colors, close framing, and his animation of that figure, it really just sings. Cloud Madonna was the first of two major paintings Cannon completed while he was an artist in residence at Dartmouth College in the summer of 1975. Past participants of the highly regarded residency included Robert Rauschenberg, Donald Judd, Walker Evans, Catherine Porter, and Jim Dine. Scholars have previously attributed vintage photographs of women at the Acoma and Zuni Pueblos in New Mexico as the inspiration for Cloud Madonna. And I'm incredibly grateful to Jason Garcia, a Santa Clara Pueblo printmaker and ceramicist, for sharing with me Cannon's more likely source imagery for this painting, which is a set of specific photographs made in 1916 by an as yet unidentified photographer taken of the women at Santa Clara Pueblo, in particular one named Laurencita Agoya. Cannon takes this static black and white version, and again, he breathes color and life into her. Cloud Madonna is Cannon's native take on Madonnas in religious art. Like Christian representations of the Virgin Mary, our Madonna also wears a vibrant blue mantle. And instead of holding a baby or baby Jesus, she walks with her life-sustaining melon, a gift of the gods in the sunburnt desert. Cloud Madonna's water jar atop her head serves as a halo, extending to the heavens, interplaying with the clouds that silhouette her face and trail down her sleeve. In Rain Priest, Cannon's priest stands exposed on an adobe surface. The large green shadow behind him suggests the blessing of fertility as the much-needed rain is arriving. Rain, which he is actively praying for in ceremony, will inevitably ensure the fertility of crops and nurture and sustain the native priest's community in the arid desert of the American Southwest. Cannon used the metaphor of raw canvas to capture the essence of the land's dryness. The diagonal rain falling in the background is proof of the priest's power. Cannon incorporated unprimed raw canvas into several other works, a strategy that modernist painter Francis Bacon deployed to emphasize the primal quality of the untreated canvas and to draw the viewer's eye to the more gestural moments within the painting. And comparatively, Cannon's raw canvas further connects the painting to contemporary life and specifically to Cannon's lived experience, drawing a parallel between the work of priest and painter. Just as the priest performs rituals to bring the rain and transform the landscape, so too does the painter use his skills to complete the image. Rain Priest exemplifies native cultural continuity and regeneration through ceremony and spirituality. Female nudes have been a subject in art for millennia. In Western art, they are often referred to as a Venus. And in Roman mythology, Venus is a goddess whose functions encompassed love, beauty, desire, sex, fertility, prosperity, and victory. Venus has become a common trope that contemporary artists still respond to. Cannon drew not just on Native American history, but his extensive Western art historical knowledge to communicate his complex realities and systems of knowledge. In Cannon's Collector No. 3, he may be riffing on Titian's famous reclining nude or Ingres's La Grande Odalisque. In Cannon's work, the sitter holds her heart rather than, although it might be T.C. Cannon's heart, the T.C. Cannon holds a heart rather than the historic offering to the goddess, a posy of roses. So now we come to the painting that is there with you all in Atlanta, Grandmother, Gestating Father, and the Washita River Runs Ribbon-Like from 1975. And this is Cannon's homage to his grandmother, the family matriarch, pregnant here with his father, Walter. She stands on the Washita River's fertile ground in Kiowa territory. And it is important to note that the Washita River was also the site of a massacre in 1868 when General Custer's soldiers invaded a peaceful Cheyenne camp, killing women and children. Yet Cannon's painting feels more celebratory, it feels more honorific. His grandmother's very presence underscores the interconnectedness between Cannon's family and the land, past and present, and a joyous reverence for the community and place that defined his life and heritage. Circles within circles, you see them again here, just like in Tuganza Rikara. And again, they symbolize renewal and healing, and they are a poetic meditation on the circular qualities of life. So in the process of doing research for the exhibition, I came upon a photocopied poem that T.C. Cannon wrote that has the same title that the painting has. And so I wanted to share that with you here. It's a little bit hard, it might be a little bit hard to read, so I typed it out here for you so you can spend a moment and just kind of think about this poem as an ekphrasis to the painting itself. It's a really beautiful, beautiful poem. A woman of sun and blood, a lady of willow arbor modesty, a woman of sandplum blossoms, a lady of small hands and big skies, a woman of the eternal breath of life, a maiden of the eternal circle, a specific angelus of some intensely burning theology. Hold on one second here. Okay. So in addition to the painting that is at the Carlos Museum, 3 years later, T.C. Cannon created a series of woodcuts in conjunction with printmakers in Japan. And you can see a version of the painting in this woodcut here on the left, Grandmother Gestating Father and the Washita River Runs, he called it Runs Through Ribbon-Like in 1978. And I just wanted to share with you some of the related woodcuts that were done on the right-hand side separately as a suite of 5 that have become known as the Memorial Woodcut Suite. Which were, again, created in partnership with a master Japanese woodcutter and printer. And work on these images began in 1975. And all of these woodcuts feature metallic accents and borders that Cannon increasingly employed later in his career, inspired by his admiration for the work of Viennese artist Friedrich Hundertwasser, who is well known for his bright palette and use of metallic pigments in his paintings and prints. Graphic works had been integral to Hundertwasser's widespread international recognition, and Cannon created large editions of silkscreens and smaller Japanese woodcut editions in which certain colors were replaced with metallic imprints. So Cannon was only able to personally sign the first 2 woodcuts from the suite before his death in an automobile accident in 1978. So his printed signature was added to the remainder of the already completed works, but he was able to sign off on 2 of the 5 prints. And Cannon's father, Walter, then added his hand-signed signature on behalf of his son. So you'll see Walter Cannon's name signed on some of these prints. And T.C. Cannon was also a prolific sketcher. He was always drawing. He was always sending letters to people. People who received his letters over the years still send them to me sometimes or send me pictures of them. He was always writing poetry, writing down lyrics to songs. So here's just a sampling of just a couple for you. And also I wanted to share with you a few drawings and sketches from his kind of Vietnam thinking. We see in 1971, it's kind of a humorous but also sad drawing where this cat is watching color TV, and on the TV you can see this big mushroom cloud, this big bomb explosion, because Vietnam, of course, was constantly on the television at the time. And then you can see that big mushroom cloud on the right in this small watercolor work of bombs and circles. And then in the middle is an untitled drawing of TC with a skeleton from 1975. So in this work, Cannon intended to illustrate the emergence of the myths and epics of Plains history, beginning with the mysterious darkness in the upper left corner of the painting and continuing with the marking beacons of sanctity and life in the center, Mother Earth and white buffalo calf. In ledger style, Mother Earth bestows with outstretched arms and open hands her life-sustaining gifts, the bison and the horse. Cannon described the figures on the right side of the painting as recognizable. He may have been thinking of how the dancer that still surrenders himself to Father Sun at the summer zenith each year, despite colonial attempts to prohibit the Sundance ceremony, or how the elder that sturdily sits gazing back at the unknown and the all-knowing. Cannon won this commission, and he completed it between 1976 and 1977 for the city of Seattle. So there was a competition and he was able to get the commission done. This epic painting was one of his last before his fatal car accident in 1978. And we can be led to contemplate the meaning of Native survival and Native survivance beyond death. Cannon's earthscape of the plains, of the plateaus, of the Great Basin history in its bright fields of color, in its movement of flight and stampede, prompts viewers to imagine a decolonized paradise. Cannon sealed his ancestral dream with red and yellow handprints at the center, which are his hands. He died in a freak car accident in Santa Fe on May 8th in 1978. And T.C. Cannon had a premonition that his life would be cut short, and yet he lived unrestrained by fear. And just 31 years old, he was taken from us too soon, and we can only imagine what could have been. Cannon's writing, poetry, and music urge us to grapple with contradiction. He asks us to look closely, to think harder. His work demonstrates that the American experience is unimaginable without Native American history and culture. In breaking from the unexpected older styles of painting and Native art, Cannon opened doors for interrogating American history and our place in it. It would not be an overstatement to say that Cannon truly liberated Native art, the reverberations of which are still felt by generations today. The lessons of T.C. Cannon extend outward, and as new scholarship is reconsidering American art and making room for a more expansive, inclusive vision of the field, a new look at T.C. Cannon's work is perfectly timed to celebrate him as an important 20th century American artist. The field of Native American art has long been marginalized, and it is really exciting to be at the fore of expanding and reimagining our definitions of what American art is and what it means to be American. And yet, why did his work go largely unrecognized in the mainstream? We can attribute reasons for this in part because Cannon's work remains largely in private collections, which complicates how widely his work has circulated. Over the course of his nearly 20-year career, he painted no more than 50 or 60 major canvases. So yes, Cannon's lack of recognition in the mainstream has something to do with the small body of work he produced over time, much of which still remains in private hands. But more importantly, this lack of recognition in the mainstream relates to broader issues of institutional racism, hierarchies of culture, and misunderstandings of ethnic racialized communities that are grossly underrepresented institutionally. Cannon believed in people's ability to connect with and understand his work because of the shared common humanity it revealed. And I think that's a really incredibly beautiful and hopeful sentiment for our time. And before I close, I just want to say that working on this project has really been the honor of a lifetime, and revisiting his work for this presentation reminds me how much more there is still to learn and to know in order to continue bringing Cannon's vision forward and his voice to a broader audience. And I'm so happy that the Carlos is borrowing this beautiful painting by T.C. Cannon, and I hope you can all go visit and bask in its glow and enjoy every minute of it. I just want to end with one of T.C. Cannon's poems, as poetry was so central to him. It's an untitled work from the 1970s referred to as Great Medicine, and it is just as raw, vivid, and beautiful as Cannon's paintings. And when we had come out of the wind, we came to a place of small mountains and large, unpredictable skies that hung there above the Canadian, Washita, and Red Rivers. We married the earth for eternity there. We were given great medicine. We were great and proper children of medicine and ceremony. We would make the world quiver with our power. And when we came out of the Holocaust, we had to stand there and bury more than necessary in the shadows at small mountains under a large sky of bleeding tears. Many of us sleep for eternity there. But we were given a greater medicine, which we now conceal. You may see it in my eye. I hear it in your song. So with that, I just want to say thank you again for coming tonight and for spending time together.